Hi from London, Cal.
Hey, Mel, aren't you the jet setter?
I am the jet setter. It's pretty exciting. I'm really emotional. In the past week, I've been to Edgbaston, I've been to Trent Bridge, I've been to the Oval, and I've been to Lords. And everywhere I go, I feel really emotional seeing it. It's so good to be back.
I can imagine it would be. It's a great part of the world to be this time of year as well, when the weather's nice and people are buzzing around town, and people are, particularly the men, are taking their shirts off the minute the sun comes out most of the time anyway. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it?
I see you say it. I'm used to them taking their shirts off here when it's like maybe 20 degrees, but it's actually hot here. It's like it's going to
I've heard.
35 degrees this weekend. So I hate to
Gee whiz.
think what they're going to be taking off, Cal. I'm going to have to. In the meantime, on that note, we really should get on with the show. Let's roll the bumper. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Timed Out for Sporting News Australia. I'm here in London with Cal in Adelaide. There's a lot to talk about since we last spoke. I've been in transit, but then over here, Cal, for that magnificent win by Sri Lanka in the second test against Australia.
Yes.
Won all the series. Obviously, a lot was happening off the field around that second test with the government. Quite how Sri Lanka managed to concentrate through all of that, I'll never know. But
crazy.
This tour, this is the second of the three subcontinent tours that Australia had earmarked. First one, Pakistan, they won 1-0. Here in Pakistan, 1-1 draw. They've got that series against India early next year. Well, there were two quite contrasting tests. They kind of maybe got a bit lucky with Travis Head taking 4 wickets in the first test. Everything happened quite quickly, but it all came undone a bit in the second test. So I was really keen to hear what you've learned about, or what we learned about Australia over there, and I guess particularly their batting against spin, whether it be leg spin, left arm spin. The ghost of Herath was their ball.
It was.
And any kind of spin, really.
Yeah, look, I actually think there's a lot of positives there for the Australian team. Look, they've got some players in that middle order that are quite inexperienced in those conditions. And I thought we saw some really positive signs from a batting standpoint. They missed a trick in that first innings of the second test. I mean, they had an opportunity there to really drive it into Sri Lanka, who were teetering at that point what did they lose? 5 for 35, I think, in that second innings, when really they should have been looking 450 plus, potentially, if they were able to get set again that next morning, at least 400. They didn't do it, and it cost them. And I think it's a harsh lesson, but a lesson that they potentially needed, because you just can't afford to give a sucker an even chance in those conditions. Once you get ahead of the game, you've got to really make hay while the sun shines. And they didn't do that, and it bit them on the backside. So, however, though, for a fair portion of the first 6 days of Test cricket, they were dominating the series. So, look, I think it was a really disappointing loss. However, I think overall we saw Mitch Swepson find his feet. I think we started to see a lot more of what we've seen from him in Shield cricket over the last 5-6 years in particular. Consistency with where he's landing the ball, putting the batters under a bit of pressure. I think he's only getting better, so that's a really good sign. Gary Lyon just does what he does. I think his ability to maintain pressure in conditions worldwide is outstanding as an orthodox bowler. And geez, I thought Mitch Stark showed plenty. He is someone who just finds a way to take wickets in flat conditions, and that was some really good signs for him. Pat Cummins is just fantastic, isn't he? He's captain fantastic. There's no doubt about it. I really liked what I saw. I think it's the last 2 series in those conditions give us a really bright outlook on the future in playing in subcontinent conditions. But there's obviously still some concern around the ability to start against spin in that middle order. Those young players will learn a lot, but it's then up to them now to formulate game plans that are going to offer some consistency long term. And I've got a lot of faith in those young players in that middle order. I think of Green, I think of Head, I think of Carey. There were some positive signs around those guys at different stages. Heady, in particular, probably just needs to nail some of those starts that he's getting. He likes to come to the crease and play some shots and get to 30 quickly. He didn't get to 30 anywhere near often enough in those four innings, did he? So it's going to be really important for him to find a way to consistently get a start and push on. We did see Ricky Ponting struggle early in his career in subcontinent conditions. I've got a lot of faith in Travis. You look at his numbers, they stack up against guys that have played 20 to 25. In the history of Australian cricket, some of our very best have got very similar records over the same period of time. He'll bounce back, but there's certainly some pressure on him going forward.
And pressure, you mentioned pressure. Some of that will obviously come from Glenn Maxwell, who was included in the squad. He was into the squad, and then wasn't played. Now, I'm not saying that would have made a difference in a game that Australia lost so convincingly either. But he is arguably Australia's best player of spin in the subcontinent, along with Steve Smith, perhaps. The two of them, they've got centuries in India. With that India series in mind, is it a case, can Glenn Maxwell just walk into that side? Do you think he needs to find a way somehow to play some red ball cricket somewhere? Or do you think Australia is still kind of a little bit wary, of going for this almost horses for courses approach to batting and selecting batters in the subcontinent countries, particularly like Sri Lanka and India?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of thought around the place that you need to play a certain amount of red ball cricket to earn your spot in the Test team. Look, in my opinion, I think you've got a fair idea as to what Glenn Maxwell's like as a player against spin, whether it's white or red in my eyes, pink even. I feel like we understand what he brings to the table. He's a very experienced cricketer now. I believe that he would be fine if he walked into a Test arena in subcontinent conditions. Bouncy Australian conditions or swinging and seaming conditions in England would be a different kettle of fish. I do believe subcontinent conditions would lend itself more to being able to switch to guns, so to speak, and for him to walk into a Test match and have an impact. But I think from his standpoint, if I was him, I'd be looking to play a few Shield games this year and try and put a bit of pressure on the selectors to not give them an excuse. He has a record in first-class cricket that would suggest that he would be successful in Test cricket, I believe. The majority of that being based in Australia on swinging bouncier conditions, not so much swinging maybe, but I think that when it comes to subcontinent conditions, I think he would be able to walk in and be fine. But I think for him, he needs to try and play some Shield cricket this year to not give them an excuse to leave him out going forward, because he's a match winner. I've seen it at Shield level. I've seen it from him. He's been able to do it at Test level in subcontinent conditions. For him, it's about not giving the selectors an excuse next time round. Because, I mean, let's face it, if he got going in a Test match in India, the ability to score quickly over there is quite considerable, and he scores quicker than most. So he would be a real weapon for the Australians. It would be interesting to see what balance the team would look like if he was to come in, and who would make way. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be there in Ranchi when he scored that century, which was amazing. It was a real show of patience as well from him, and I thought that was going to be the start of something. But
yeah,
but I think you're right. I think that's going to be really interesting to see. From a bit of red ball talk to white ball talk. India, England. I don't know if you've been watching it over there, Cal. Boy, Talk about wild swings. You go from south of the Thames to north of the Thames, south of the Thames at the Oval. India absolutely pounded them. I came up with a new word, if you check my piece on Sporting News.
Crazy.
Spifflicate. They spiffed England. Absolutely more than by 10 wickets. North of the river to Lords. And England win by 10 wickets. It was England's best ever bowling performance in an ODI. Reece Topley, best figures ever.
Crazy.
You won at Lords. What did you make of those? Because it was quite a wild turnaround.
Yeah, I mean that is as big a swing in momentum as you'll ever see. I think it's interesting though. Like the white ball is swinging over in England, isn't it, at the moment? And I find it really interesting that the dynamic. So when we traditionally watch an ODI series between two big sides, when they're playing relatively freely, you know, everyone's saying, well, 320's not enough these days. But what we do see is when it starts to swing and seam around, or even start to spin and slow up, the modern day player does at times really struggle with that because they struggle to switch over once it's not what they normally face, which is flat wickets, not doing a lot, coming onto the bat nicely. The ability to adjust really quickly, it hasn't necessarily come easily for the modern day player. And we see that in the big tournaments. We see it in the World Cup quite regularly. Everyone talked about the World Cup in England being, if you're not making 350, you're not in it. The wickets tire. They get dry. They offer different challenges, and the teams that adapt best inevitably see themselves at the back end of the tournament. In this situation, the ball's swinging and it's seaming, and the top orders have really struggled. And it's actually been a nice little change up. I don't want to see it week in, week out, but at 250, 260 from a first innings total standpoint is good for me. I think that's offering a good contest between bat and ball. We saw an outstanding performance from Reece Topley, who has the ability to move the ball off the straight, and offered some challenges. It was great.
Yeah, it was. And for someone like Reece Topley, who has had like 5 stress fractures and a broken hand and everything else, his dad's a really popular figure. He was up in the press box. I was chatting to him yesterday. I had a lovely chat with him during the match before Reece ended up getting himself onto the leaderboard. So that was great. All comes down to the decider, of course, in Manchester, and I'm going to be there on Sunday, which is very exciting. One thing, do check out my piece I wrote on yesterday, because it was a little bit, I had all the feels, because it was my first ODI back at Lords since the World Cup final. And in fact, England, it was only their second game there since the World Cup final, and it was the 3rd anniversary of that crazy day. So all the memories, similar score, first inning score, which was interesting as well. Another in the 240s. So there you go. Now, look, speaking of ODIs, pretty big, very significant news coming this week with the cancellation of Australia's ODI series against South Africa. Look, we knew this was on the cards. It's no surprise. We knew this was coming. Both boards want, they both want their best players available for their own T20 tournament. South Africa, this is their 3rd attempt to launch one at home. They've got some big backers from the IPL. Cricket Australia want more of their big name players. They've being taken to court by Channel 7 for not providing in Channel 7's eyes a superior contest because a lot of the players, international players, aren't available. So that sets that up. South Africa are risking, Cal, their qualification for World Cup. These are worth points in the Super League for qualification for the World Cup. They're willing to risk it. They're not, I don't think they're happy with Cricket Australia because they wanted to try and find another window. Cricket Australia said, no, we can't. So here we are. Is this a thin edge of the wedge that we're talking about? Doesn't this have serious ramifications for the game that a series like this could be called off, particularly when World Cup qualification is key?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting situation we find ourselves in with ODI cricket. I think it's not something Cricket Australia would have ever looked to do themselves. I'm pretty certain of that. But I think they'd be pretty glad that South Africa have.
Oh yeah.
It's a big win for Cricket Australia because their team, their one-day international team, gets the points without having to front up, and they get their international players back into the BBL, which they would have been scratching their heads for a long time trying to work out how they were ever going to be able to do that. So it's worked out really well for them. South Africa, they're taking a risk. They wouldn't want to front up to those qualifiers on some iffy pitches and get found out in a toss of the coin style situation and miss out on qualifications for the World Cup. But certainly it's an interesting situation from a T20 domestic standpoint. What we do know is that there's been a lot of money thrown into this South African league from some IPL owners who it sounds like they're buying up these South African franchises, which would have, I think, put some pressure on the South African Cricket Board to pull their side out of this ODI series in Australia and make sure their international players are ready to go for this league. The other thing it does do is, I think, put a lot more pressure or a lot of pressure back onto Cricket Australia to suggest that this South African league is going to challenge the BBL and it's going to challenge them for overseas players and trying to lure overseas players the best to the league. We know the UAE league is going to be up and running as well this year. I struggle to believe that the BBL is going to be able to hold on to any of the elite T20 international player talent for the business end of the tournament. I feel like we're going to see all these big names in the auction. It's going to look pretty and they're going to be under the spotlight and it's going to be great in this draft. But the fact of the matter is that they're probably not going to be there at the business end of the tournament when it's there to be won. So I feel like Cricket Australia will, on one side of the sword, be, this is great, we've got our international players for the BBL, but they're also going to have to keep an eye on these other leagues and understand the landscape, the international cricket landscape. These T20 leagues are going to put them under a lot of pressure and a lot of heat going forward. And once the BBL was seen as a top 2 T20 league in the world, I think that position has been challenged for a long time now. They're in real danger of slipping a lot deeper into the list than that.
I wonder if they might see it as there being a trade-off, or how it might work in that they might be able to get some of the big name internationals early in the tournament and then bank on the fact that they'll have the big name Australians at the business end. Because I agree with you. I think it's going to be incredibly hard for them to hold it with all those other tournaments. Look, another side to that as well. I mean, it is just really astonishing that that South Africa would risk it. Since coming here, the pace, the way that these white ball games are being crammed in, so these India T20s, then ODIs, and then straight off the back of them, you've got ODIs and T20s against South Africa. The way that the games here are being squeezed in to leave a window in August for the 100 is just astonishing. And I actually asked both Josh Butler and Rohit Sharma for a piece that I'm going to write today, last night, about the cancelling of leagues, trying to get a window. Are we getting to the point? Are ODIs and T20s still important to play as bilateral series outside of World Cups? And they gave really interesting answers. You'll have to read my piece to hear it.
I will, don't worry.
Yes, but they both were adamant, and I've asked Aaron Finch this as well, adamant that you do need bilateral white ball series in both formats outside of World Cups. That it's different to leagues. It's getting players together. It's gelling. If you want the best quality of cricket, you need to actually, have the opportunity to play together. So they all want it. Rohit actually said, and Josh agreed with him, that he thinks it can be done, but it needs to be better managed. That having too many games, like the way that they're playing these, it's just really too much for the players when it comes to recovery. And this may be why we end up seeing these wild momentum swings as well. But it's so close. There's no time for recovery. I mean, they're playing back-to-back days in some of the T20s. with maybe one day off for the ODIs. He suggested like maybe they could look at triangular and quadrangular series, like like we used to have, and we used to see a lot more in cricket, so that you could have a series of white ball cricket, but it's not taking as much time out of the calendar while you've got two different lots of countries trying to play their own bilateral series. So I thought that was interesting. Josh Butler kind of agreed with that, but they both said that they think it's important. But just how you do when countries are desperately trying to create their own windows. There's already a window for an IPL. There's a World Cup every year. So the number of months where you can actually stage test cricket and bilateral white ball series is just shrinking. And forget about players having time off to recover. What are your thoughts on that, Cal?
Well, where do you take the time off? I think Sunil Gavaskar said the other day he couldn't work out why players would ever take a rest from international duties. Why aren't they taking a rest during T20 leagues like the IPL? Well, I think we all understand why that's happening. But certainly, ODI cricket is extremely important to the landscape in my eyes. I think it's a great game. It ebbs and flows. Some of the best games of cricket we've ever seen have been one-day internationals, 50-over cricket. You don't have to look any further than that World Cup win to England at Lords against New Zealand. So I don't think one-day international cricket's going anywhere. TV loves it. Sponsors love it. It's a great day if you head down to watch one as a spectator. But all I hear when this argument comes up is we shouldn't be playing international T20s except for the run into the World Cup. I just don't understand why we're playing all these international T20s, cramming them in there and making it almost impossible for players to put their hand up for every game. Let's give them a rest and play some international T20s in the lead up to a World Cup. Leave the space for ODI and Test cricket and the domestic T20 leagues. There's so many of them now. There's so much domestic T20 cricket now. Let's give those leagues some space. Let's leave the T20 internationals and make sure there's plenty of room for ODIs and Test cricket, because at the moment who would want to be one of the people putting the fixtures together each year for the ICC, the Future Tours program? That would, it's just not, you couldn't pay anyone enough, I don't reckon, to make that worthwhile. So that's where I stand on it, Mel.
Yeah, they're doing it at the moment, actually. I think it's coming out next month, or they're finalising it in the next month. So, yeah, I agree with you. Cricket scheduling, I always say it, is, I think, the biggest issue in cricket, hands down. So, yeah, you might be right. I feel like something's going to give. I think I'd rather bilateral T20s give than ODIs. But at the moment, just looking at the pace of these games here, it's crazy. So I don't see how it can keep going on. In Australia, something's given, and that's the South Africa tour. Is at the thin edge of the wedge. I kind of suspect it might be. So it'll be very interesting to have a look at that FTP when it comes out. Cal, it's so good to talk to you, as always. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, it's been great.
Oh, yeah. Distance cannot keep us apart, as I always say. So
never will.
No, never will. We've got lots more coming up. Australia, women are over in Pakistan, and Pakistan are over in Ireland, I should say, as well. So we've got the run into the Commonwealth Games. Lots happening here with the South Africa series starting, and I'm sure that there's going to be some news coming out of Australia, because there just always is. That's how it rolls. But
there is, no doubt about it.
But until next time, whatever cricket you're watching, I really hope you enjoy it. And Cal, you stay safe over there.
You too, Mel. Enjoy the cricket in the summer over in England.